Morning comes too early, hands already warm, working for a better day, trying to keep me warm. Boss man count his tally, we just count our turn.
Our title for session 4 is Elusive Wisdom. But in reality, it is more the idea of a single direction for these 2 chapters that is elusive. We're going to be moving all over the place in this session. We will begin with Proverbs, then pivot to a wisdom dialogue where the author goes back and forth between contradictory ideas. Is Qohelet a sage or a wise man? Is that even possible? What else has he learned about the affairs of man under the sun? At the end of chapter 6, verses 10 through 12, we heard about human limitations and the vast contrast between the power of God and the finitude of humans. We'll get back to that same idea again in verses 13 and 14 of chapter 7. But chapter 7 begins with a shift in direction and a series of proverbs. In chapter 8, we begin with a poem that seems to contradict the closing verses of chapter 7. But it is those proverbs that we will read in a moment. But first, a prayer. O God, our Father, open our eyes and enlighten our minds as we study your word. So grant that our minds may know your truth and our hearts may feel your love, and then confirm and strengthen our wills that we may go out to live what we have learned. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Ecclesiastes 7, 1 through 14 is the first of 3 collections of proverbs in Ecclesiastes. A proverb is an artfully constructed literary vehicle for imparting instructions. As a literary form, it may be highly compact. Much is said in a few words, creating a kind of riddle that stimulates the reader to actively reflect on its meaning. A proverb expresses some truth that includes a guide for behavior. They're not intended as universal truths or timeless absolutes. As we saw earlier when we talked about time, a proverb is appropriate in one situation may not apply to another situation. These are mostly 2-part proverbs using a better than format, better this than that. And often the meaning of the second part is dependent on the first. We're going to try to go through these one at a time. So let's begin chapter 7, verse 1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. The first line seems reasonable. A good name is better than precious ointment. Basically, a good reputation is more valuable than wealth. But what about the second line? The day of death than the day of birth. In what way might the day of one's death be better than the day of one's birth? We consider the possibilities here. The specific choice of precious ointment or oil for the comparison in the first line may refer to the practice of anointing bodies for burial. Perhaps this proverb was directed to those who could not afford fine oil for burial. Better to be buried with a good reputation than with fine ointments. We could also point out that the ointment is by nature highly perishable. We can contrast this with biblical tradition that says a good name is durable, living on in the memory of one's children or of one's community. So we are comparing something of lasting value, that is reputation, with something that is valuable but unstable and liable to ruin, the ointment. With this in mind, let's look at the second line, the day of death, when one's reputation is finally secure, as compared to the day of birth when one's reputation is not yet made, is better, right? It is not clear that this is what was intended, but it could be. It is reasonable that there is a relationship between the first half of the couplet and the second half. On the other hand, Qohelet could be saying that departing life is better than entering it, because life itself, regardless of one's reputation, is a miserable affair from one end to the other. So let's look at the second proverb, verse 2. It is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of everyone, and the living will lay it to heart. Now, this could mean that since our common fate is mortality, it is better to confront it by going to a house of mourning than to avoid it by going to the house of feasting. Verses 3 and 4 seem to continue with this same theme. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of countenance the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is in the house of mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Sorrow is better than laughter, we are told. Qohelet's rationale is that a downcast face may gladden the heart. The second half of verse 2 may give us another clue. For this is the end of everyone, and the living will lay it to heart. The reason that attendance on the house of mourning is better than attendance on the house of feasting is that the house of mourning is the ultimate destination of all human beings. There is a truth in the house of mourning that it behooves the living to ponder, to think about. Mirth and revelry should not obscure this reality. Life is appropriately viewed from the vantage point of death. The paradox of gladness through grimness would probably have appealed to Qohelet's sensitivity. Let's go on to verse 5. It's better to hear the rebuke of the wise than to hear the song of fools. So this may mean that essentially nothing in substance is to be heard from fools. Verse 6 carries a similar theme. For like the crackling of thorns under a pot, so is the laughter of fools. This also is vanity. The idea may be here that laughter of fools is grating, like the noisy sound of quick burning fire of thorns. Let's go to verse 7. Surely oppression makes the wise foolish, and a bribe corrupts the heart. So it's interesting here that Qohelet suggests that the wise may turn foolish. He has recognized and lamented the effects of oppression before, but this is the first time he talks about its impact on the wise. It's also difficult to see the parallel between the first and second half of this proverb. They each describe circumstances that may be the downfall of the wise person, oppression and bribery. Alter translates this as, oppression's profit drives the wise man wild, and a bribe destroys the mind. This translation makes a little more sense in tying the two lines together. Verses 8 through 10 deal with keeping perspective, perhaps in relation to a change in fortune. Verse 8. Better is the end of a thing than its beginning. The patient in spirit are better than the proud in spirit. This sounds a little like verse 1, right? A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. The best perspective one can hope to gain on a matter is its outcome. Life is unpredictable. It's better to wait patiently for the end of a thing than to presume to know the outcome ahead of time. Verse 9. Do not be quick to anger, for anger lodges in the bosom of fools. Again, we see the push to be patient. Don't be too quick to be angry. Show patience. Verse 10. Do not say, why were the former days better than these? For it is not from wisdom that you ask this. Qohelet would, of course, view this as a foolish and nostalgic question because in his philosophy, things were never better. Why were the former days better than these? Well, of course, they were never better. This same cycle of futility has always occurred. The next two proverbs discuss the advantage of wisdom over money. So verse 11. Wisdom is as good as an inheritance, an advantage to those who see the sun. So perhaps this means that wisdom is nice to have, but still better is wisdom with a good annual income, right? Verse 12. For the protection of wisdom is like the protection of money. And the advantage of knowledge is that wisdom gives life to the one who possesses it. This follows from the previous proverb. The security provided by wisdom will help one attain or help one manage the security provided by wealth. But there may be other ways to interpret these two verses as well. But the next verse draws an unmistakable boundary on the limits of the value of wisdom. So verse 13, consider the work of God. Who can make straight what he has made crooked? When it comes to the work of God, wisdom runs up against a decisive barrier. In the first chapter, you remember a saying about the impossibility of straightening what is crooked. Here, the responsible party is named and the crooked thing identified. God is responsible, and the crooked thing is God's work. Such baffling work shows up in the turns of fortune that we experience in the course of life. These are beyond the control of people who cannot straighten out the work of God by wisdom or by any other means. Since we cannot predict, much less control these occasions, we should just accept each one as it comes, enjoying the good day fully and taking the bad day in stride. Go to verse 14. In the day of prosperity, be joyful. In the days of adversity, consider God has made the one as well as the other, so that mortals may not find out anything that comes after them. Since there's really nothing we can do, this advice is really encouragement to take the ups and downs of life as they come. So we've discussed possible meanings of all of these proverbs, but there may be other explanations that make just as much sense. So you can always go back and rethink them. You can try that out as an exercise. The last half of chapter 7 could be titled Elusive Wisdom. It begins with a section on the riddles of life, specifically the lapses in the operation of retributive justice. So let's read 15 through 18. In my vain life, I have seen everything. There are righteous people who perish in their righteousness, and there are wicked people who prolong their life in their evil doing. Do not be too righteous, and do not act too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Do not be too wicked, and do not be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of the one without letting go of the other. For the one who fears God shall succeed with both. Verse 15, of course, where it talks about the righteous perishing, deliberately denies a fundamental assumption of Psalms, Proverbs, and other biblical books. The righteous aren't supposed to perish. Qohelet goes on to say that any kind of excess, whether in righteousness or in evil, is a provocation of man and fate. Verse 19 through 22 may represent a wisdom dialogue, a sequence in which a conventional wisdom saying is followed immediately by one in which some way challenges it. So let's read 19 and 20. Wisdom gives strength to the wise more than 10 rulers who are in a city. Surely there is no one on earth so righteous as to do good without ever sinning. First, the effectiveness of wisdom for the wise is affirmed, although somewhat peculiar. Rulers aren't a likely source for helping out the wise or giving them strength. In any event, this is followed by a sobering comment on the human limitations. No one is entirely righteous. So let's look at 21 and 22. Do not give heed to everything that people say, or you may hear your servant cursing you. Your heart knows that many times you have yourself cursed others. We all recognize the ubiquitous impulse to be malicious. Therefore, one is well advised not to eavesdrop on one's servant's conversations, because you are all too likely to hear distressing things. So don't do it. Now we go to a summary. In verses 23 through 29, Qohelet tells us all he has learned through wisdom. All this I have tested by wisdom. I said, I will be wise, but it was far from me. That which is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? I turned my mind to know and to search out and to seek wisdom in the sum of things, and to know that wickedness is folly and that foolishness is madness. I found more bitter than death, the woman who is a trap, whose heart is nets, whose hands are fetters. One who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. See, this is what I found, says the teacher, adding one thing to another to find the sum, which my mind has sought repeatedly, but I have not found. One man among 1,000 I found, but a woman among all these I have not found. See, this alone I found, that God made human beings straightforward, but they have devised many schemes. The misogynistic declaration in verse 26 is notorious, but it is clear from the context that that kind of woman Qohelet has in mind is the seductress, or the stranger woman who often appears in wisdom literature. Human nature begins with the potential for honesty, but people pervert this potential by devising devious calculations like the wily accountants juggling figures in their books. And this brings us to the beginning of chapter 8, where we revisit injustice and again talk of death. So we begin chapter 8, the first verse. Who is like the wise man, and who knows the interpretation of a thing? Being wise makes one's face shine, but arrogance changes one's face. This chapter begins with a rhetorical question. Who is like the wise man? There's some obvious arrogance in this opening poem, but it is also a bit strange since he has just testified in 723 that even with all his considerable effort, he could not attain the status of the wise. He even said no person could attain it. But let's go on. Verse 2 through 9. Keep the king's command, and because of your sacred oath, do not be terrified. Go from his presence. Do not delay when the matter is unpleasant. For he does whatever he pleases. For the word of the king is powerful, and who can say to him, what are you doing? Whoever obeys a command will meet no harm, and the wise mind will know the time and way. For every matter has its time and way, although the troubles of mortals lie heavy upon them. Indeed, they do not know what is to be, for who can tell them how it will be? No one has power over the wind to restrain the wind, nor power over the day of death. There is no discharge from the battle, nor does wickedness deliver those who practice it. All this I observed, applying my mind to all that is done under the sun, while one person exercises authority over another, to the other's hurt. Here we have a series of purely pragmatic admonitions involving the dangers lurking in the corridors of power. We are told to obey the powers that be. The idea near the end of the passage is that just as a man has no power to shut in the wind, which, as we recall, goes round perpetually to the four corners of the earth, no one has power over death. Let's go on to verses 10 through 13. Then I saw the wicked approaching to sacrifice. They go in and out of the holy place, and they boast in the city that they have done such things. This also is vanity, because sentence against an evil deed is not executed speedily. The human heart is fully set to do evil. Though sinners do evil 100 times or prolong their lives, yet I know that it will be well with those who fear God, because they stand in fear before him. But it will not be well with the wicked, neither will they prolong their days like a shadow, because they do not stand in fear before God. In many of the Psalms, the speaker confronted with the worldly success of the wicked says that they flourish only for a moment and will soon suffer judgment. Qohelet, observing social and political realities, sees that the wicked often endure long in their success, and in this way they actually encourage others to emulate their evil acts. However, even though Qohelet knows that the wicked flourish, with no sign of retribution, he wants desperately to cling to the idea that there is nevertheless a divine moral order in which the righteous are rewarded and the wicked punished. So let's look at verses 14 and 15. There is a vanity that takes place on earth. that there are righteous people who are treated according to the conduct of the wicked, and wicked people who are treated according to the conduct of the righteous. I said that this is also vanity. So I commend enjoyment, for there is nothing better for people under the sun than to eat and drink and enjoy themselves. For this will go with them and their toil through the days of life that God gives them under the sun. In verse 14, we see there is a vanity that takes place on earth. This might be better translated as there is an absurdity that takes place on earth. In this passage, Qohelet swings back from moral hopefulness to an unblinking observation. In this unsubstantial, fleeting existence of mere breath, we cannot make head or tail of any system of reward and punishment now or later. We can do nothing better than to enjoy what is given to us. Verses 16 and 17 to the end of the chapter. When I applied my mind to know wisdom and to see the business that is done on earth, how one's eyes see sleep, neither day nor night, then I saw all the work of God, that no one can find out what is happening under the sun. However much they may toil is seeking, they will not find it out. Even though those who are wise claim to know, they cannot find it out. The idea of sleepless pursuit of wisdom is surely appropriate to Qohelet's repeated affirmation of his dedication to philosophical investigation. Yet after all his efforts, he claims no one can find out what is happening under the sun. And here's where we'll end this session. In session 5, we'll read chapters 9 and 10, and again speak of life and of death. Hope you can join our discussion on Monday evening. If you have not already done so, you can send an email to online.classes@northgateumc.org to get the Zoom link. Meanwhile, have a good week.
People talk about difference, but I just see the same. Every heart need kindness, every soul need a name, and we're deep. Children laughing somewhere, sounds of better days. Keep the light inside you, don't let the darkness stay. So sing a song for mercy, sing it clear and kind. We all walk this same good earth, just trying to ease our mind.